Get ready to rumble. Shilling Show Unleashed on the Seven Thunders Media Network. Former city councilor, husband, father, and community watchdog. Your host, Rob Schilling.
Welcome to the Schilling Show Unleashed podcast. Remember, your direct support makes our show possible, and you can directly support this podcast by visiting shillingshow.com and then clicking on the Patreon banner at the top of the page to make a monthly contribution. We appreciate your support. I want to talk today about Jennifer Carroll Foy, a woman of color, a Democrat, and a candidate for governor in Virginia. I have read her press releases from her campaign with increasing concern. I wanted to make you aware of the extremist positions being taken by Jennifer Carroll Foy, and today's topic will be the topic of life versus death. Democrats have become the party of death, and Jennifer Carroll Foy is exemplifying it very well. Jennifer Carroll Foy is, in her press release on this issue, the mom of two, and it never ceases to amaze me how somebody could say, I am a mother of two, and yet I would have or could have chosen to take the lives of one of these children I profess to love just because it wasn't convenient to have them. It's never made sense to me. Jennifer Carroll Foy goes on to say she knows that, quote, attacks on abortion rights persist regardless of who's in the Oval Office. And so when did abortion become a right? When was there a right in the United States Constitution, which is supposed to laud the pursuit of life, liberty, and happiness? When did it become a right to kill your own child? I don't think any such right exists. And yet this is the language that we're being, and yet this is the language that Jennifer Carroll Foy uses to confuse people or to trick them. This is a quote. I've heard this sentiment that now that we have a Democratic White House and Congress, there's not much to worry about. But we cannot be complacent. With the stacking of the federal judiciary with judges hostile to our fundamental rights, Roe versus Wade and the legal right to abortion is in jeopardy. This is fascinating to me that a fundamental right, according to Jennifer Carroll Foy, is the right to kill a child, to dismember it in the womb. This is the twisting of the language. This is what the Bible told us in the end times. It would be calling right wrong and wrong right, bad good, good bad, light for dark and dark for light. Jennifer Carroll Foy and the Democrat Party exemplify that. Carroll Foy knows that protecting Roe simply isn't enough. Over 1,200 anti-abortion laws have passed since the landmark 1973 Supreme Court ruling, all disproportionately impacting black people and people of color. A couple things very interesting here. First of all, they were never using the word black routinely for the past probably 10 years. It was always African American. Now all of a sudden we're back to black again. That's an aside, but it's something you should note. But the abortion industry has targeted black people and people of color. This is like a call for genocide. This is cultural suicide for somebody black to say that the laws passed have been disproportionately impacting black people and people of color means not enough of their babies have been killed. What else could that mean? And anti-abortion laws passed, 1,200 of them? Well, how interesting that is. How many abortions have there been? 60 plus million. I think the number's around 63 million since Roe v. Wade. So there have been a lot more abortions than there have been anti-abortion laws, that's for sure. Jennifer Carroll Foy goes on to say that she's seen firsthand the ramifications. What happened? Jennifer Carroll Foy goes on to say she's seen firsthand the ramifications of what happens when people take advantage of communities, especially communities of color and low socioeconomic status. Right now, there's a fake abortion clinic in my hometown spewing out falsehoods about abortion and reproductive health to people just trying to get help and information. So you know what she's talking about here are the pregnancy centers. We have a wonderful one right here in Virginia called Thrive, or formerly known as the Pregnancy Centers of Central Virginia, that saves the lives of the unborn, that helps women who are struggling with a difficult decision and considering something that they would regret for the rest of their lives, and helps them to step out of what would be a life-altering, horrible decision, not only for her, but for the child that she would wind up killing. And yet, this is now called a fake abortion clinic that is spewing out falsehoods. Carroll Foy continues, when that happens, it says that we aren't capable of making our own decisions, that we aren't entitled to the right to control our own bodies and able to make our own decisions. And those types of attacks are attacks on all of us. Again, just twisting the truth and turning everything upside down. Yes, you are being taken advantage of by the abortion industry. That's the problem here. The abortion industry has targeted communities of color, and very specifically black people, going back to Margaret Sanger and the foundation of Planned Parenthood. And did I hear that very recently Planned Parenthood actually disassociated themselves from Margaret Sanger? Finally, after all these years, they got wise enough to do that. We all know the truth, but that's what they're telling people. She goes on to attack the 4,000 so-called pregnancy crisis centers across the country, again calling them fake clinics that misrepresent themselves and lie to pregnant people about the gestational age of their pregnancy, about their options, about abortion care. That is a stupid name if I've ever heard one. About their options and about abortion care, the most ridiculous name I've ever heard. Abortion doesn't care for anybody. It disregards the mother and the child. And how many abortions, and about how abortions, including how safe abortions are and how abortions are performed. How could abortions be safe when the fundamental practice of abortion is to kill a child? You see the language she's using here, these total lies that are being put forward by Democrats like Jennifer Carroll Foy and being told to her own community. She goes on to say the majority of them, meaning the crisis pregnancy centers, are strategically placed in primarily black and brown communities. The reason being, and she doesn't tell you this, is because the abortion centers are strategically placed in black and brown communities. Many of the deceptive anti-choice centers have received federal loans and other grants to keep them staffed and afloat, while actual healthcare clinics that provide abortion are shut down due to laws, targeted regulations of abortion providers. In just 5 years, from 2011 to 2016, 162 clinics that provided abortion services are closed. That's great news. That's wonderful. And by the way, do you notice that she doesn't mention the amount of money that's going into the abortion industry to kill all these children and decimate the lives of their parents? Not a word about that. Jennifer Carroll Foy, a black candidate for governor and a Democrat here in Virginia, for a large majority of this country, especially black, brown, and poor people, Roe v. Wade exists in name only, a protection afforded only to the white and affluent. Meanwhile, black and brown people are offered faux science by anti-abortion activists masquerading as morally sound, informative medical professionals. Isn't this demeaning and diminishing to her own black and brown and poor people? Because what you're telling us here is if they're having the wool pulled over their eyes, they're not smart enough to figure it out. Really, I think that shows that the black and brown and people of color in Virginia, if they are deciding not to have abortions in greater numbers, that they're far more intelligent than the so-called white and affluent. When there's an attack on access to abortion and reproductive health care, it's actually an attack on people of color more than anyone else. As governor, Carroll Foy says, I will ensure that our state is that brick wall protecting people in Virginia so they can have access to abortion. And this is what the Democrat Party has become. The Democrat Party is the party of death, the party that bows at the altar of child sacrifice. Carroll Foy is also dedicated to expanding abortion access. Now, this one left me scratching my head. And other reproductive health care services for LGBTQ people who are disproportionately impacted by anti-abortion laws. How on earth could that be? By the nature of LGBTQ relationships, at least some of those in the alphabet there is no reproduction. So how could they be disproportionately impacted by anti-abortion laws? And what would you say, and what would the LGBTQ community say if people were able to ascertain that they had an LGBTQ person in the womb and decided to abort for that reason? Which side of this fence would they fall on? Carroll Foy concludes here by saying what goes hand in hand with reproductive justice that a lot of people don't talk about is working to strengthen and protect trans rights. Now, what that has to do with abortion, I have no idea. We have to go a step further and say that trans people also need equitable access to health care, including reproductive care. It's about ensuring all people have access to abortion care, no matter how much is in their checking account, what their zip code is, or who they love. It's all about equity. It's all about respect. It's about social justice. It's about racial justice. It's about civil rights. That's why I'm going to fight so vehemently to ensure people are protected in every possible way, especially when it comes to abortion care and reproductive health care. So I'm going to fight very hard to protect you by allowing you to kill your own children. And this is what passes for logic and political discourse in America today, in Virginia today, and apparently in the black and brown communities today if they vote for somebody like Jennifer Carroll Foy. It is evil incarnate. We knew it was coming. Now it's here. The Schilling Show Unleashed podcast continues in a moment.
Support this podcast online at schillingshow.com.
BorderHawk.news is a one-stop shop with the latest news about immigration nationalism and globalism. The BorderHawk staff daily curates immigration news stories and, in the fashion of the Drudge Report, updates the site with cutting-edge content and original first-class commentary. BorderHawk.news highlights national and international media reports, tweets, and nuggets buried in local news blurbs, polls, video clips, and policy research. BorderHawk is pro-legal immigration, pro-rule of law, but against an unsecure border as countless Americans have suffered violence at the hands of criminal illegal aliens. And an increasing number of Americans are concerned about how mass migration affects their daily life. BorderHawk.news will remain on the forefront of the immigration issue with a buffet of info to read, evaluate, and share. Bookmark BorderHawk.news. Add them on social media at BorderHawkNews on Twitter.
Looking out for us. Rob Show.
The Schilling Show Unleashed podcast continues, and we welcome Adam Andrzejewski, the CEO and founder of Open the Books. And today we're talking about opening the books on Washington in a number of ways. So, Adam, welcome to the Schilling Show Unleashed, and thanks for joining us this morning.
Well, it's great to be on the program, Rob. Thank you very much for having me on your podcast.
Would you tell people who are not familiar about Open the Books and why you founded this organization?
Well, our mission at openthebooks.com is very simple. It's every dime online in real time. So what that means is we capture every dime. Our goal is to capture every dime of government spending at every level, and that's the federal level, state, and local level across the entire country. So last year, we filed 41,500 Freedom of Information Act requests. That was the most open records request ever filed in the history of the country. We captured $6 trillion of government spending last year. And now we display all of that on our website at openthebooks.com, where people can start to follow the money and hold the political class accountable for tax and spend decisions.
Adam, I'm very curious, as one who has pursued a number of freedom of information lawsuits here in Virginia and run into a lot of brick walls, particularly at the local level. How do you find the law working in these various inquiries that you've made?
So sometimes we don't. We've had to sue 3 states for their checkbooks. We started in my home state of Illinois, where we had to sue a Republican comptroller, Judy Barta-Pinka, back in 2012 for the state checkbook. She said that the state doesn't have a quote-unquote magical checkbook, and we reminded her that the state doesn't have magical taxpayers either. And within 9 months, we'd forced over 10 years of line-by-line state of Illinois spending. The same thing happened in Wyoming with a Republican state auditor, Cynthia Cloud. She refused to turn over the state checkbook. She said that it would take years and years to produce a state checkbook. We sued her. she didn't run for office again. The new state auditor came in. Within 30 days, she produced 6 years of line-by-line state spending. So oftentimes the excuses, the more excuses, it raises a red flag for us. We're down to one state. It's California. And so a year ago in January 2020, we sued the Democratic State Comptroller Betty Yee for the state checkbook. She said she couldn't produce one transaction out of about 40 million entries last year. She said that they couldn't locate any of those, her words. So we sued her. We think we're going to win that one as well.
Adam, it's very troubling. I was a formerly elected official here in Charlottesville, Virginia, and it seems to me that the institutions of local, state, and even federal government are invested in keeping these things a secret. I think this is a rhetorical question, but isn't there software that exists that would allow all of these to put their checkbooks online for easy access, and is anybody implementing that?
Well, we always wish very humorously that if we had subpoena power, we could do this in a matter of hours. Look, our auditors, they know how to come in on these big databases, download it, redact all the information that shouldn't be going out the door, and publish all the public information. It doesn't take a lot of time. This is the big data age. This is the age of the best in technology. We could do it very quickly.
Let's go to a recent report you had, the militarization of U.S. executive agencies. The last several times I've been in Washington, D.C., I've taken note of the number of vehicles and individuals I've seen representing various agencies that are armed. I was astounded and wondering the purpose of all of these militarized U.S. executive agencies. How many do we have?
We've got 103 now, according to our data that we've captured out of the federal checkbook, that have arrest and firearm authority and that are purchasing guns, ammunition, and military-style equipment. So, Rob, think about this. After grabbing legal power, and too much legal power is centered in the federal bureaucracy, and all of us have to live under the heavy boot of the regulations, power, and scope of the federal government. And after grabbing legal power, the next step, quite simply, bureaucrats are amassing firepower. And we've detailed that out in this report. 103 agencies.
We should talk about the bureaucracy that's overseeing all of this. So is there a single entity, for example, the White House, that is controlling all of this, or are these little fiefdoms that are armed, and should we be concerned over it?
Well, I think we should be concerned over it. You've got special agents over at Social Security. You've got 458 special agents that are armed over at Health and Human Services. The special agents at Health and Human Services, we noticed in the federal checkbook, training. They're trained by the same contractors that train our special forces military. All of these things. There's 48 special agents at the space agency, NASA, and they can tote machine guns.
I think, Adam, a lot of people are particularly concerned very specifically about the IRS because they're already, in many ways, the seemingly dangerous organization. They have a lot of power. So what does the IRS do? Do we have any audits or understanding what they do with their armament and to what extent they are purchasing arms and ammunition?
So the IRS, they employ a little under 2,200 special agents. That's 2,200. The latest year available on these statistics, which is also troubling, is 2018. So we can't get any information out of the IRS after 2018 on the number of special agents. Now, look, historically, these special agents, have been involved in, for instance, the arrest and jailing of Al Capone. They solved the Lindbergh kidnapping. So they've had a long history of a law enforcement purpose. But in 2018, on the editorial page of the Wall Street Journal, with former U.S. Senator Dr. Tom Coburn and I, we published our editorial, Why Does the IRS Need Guns? And we detail out in this report just what they have purchased and amassed in terms of guns, ammunition, and military-style equipment. For example, the IRS owns 4,600 guns. They've stockpiled in their gun lockers 5 million rounds of ammunition. They own 621 shotguns, 539 long-barrel rifles, and 15 submachine guns over at the Internal Revenue Service.
I don't know if you did the math, but how many rounds per gun do they have if they have 5 million rounds of ammunition?
Yeah, I think it was about 3,000 rounds per special agent.
Okay, so we look at all of this and we say, lawful gun owners in the United States of America right now are having trouble getting ammunition. Where's the check and balance to all of this? Who's overseeing this, and why is this massive, what appears to be an overbuy, allowed?
So that's the point. Conservatives have long argued that while the left comes after the Second Amendment, meanwhile, government itself is arming up. Now, this is outside of the Department of Defense, and what we're talking about here are rank and file, traditional regulatory, paper-pushing agencies that have arrest and firearm authority and are stocking up on guns, ammunition, and military-style equipment. These are the questions that need to be asked. Look, we asked these questions, like I said earlier, during the Obama administration. And what we found was that the Trump administration carried forward these purchasing patterns. So, for example, the average purchase, inflation adjusted, during the Obama years was just a little under $200 million outside of the Department of Defense. And this included the law enforcement agencies like the Department of Justice, Homeland Security. The average purchase was about $200 million a year in terms of these guns, ammunition, and military-style equipment. During the Trump years, it was $172 million per year. So though it was down slightly in inflation adjusted, the whole complex, it rolled on.
Adam, I'd like to go to a couple of other case studies. This one really had me scratching my head. I have conducted some business with the Small Business Administration some years ago, and I don't recall ever seeing any arms. What on earth do they have armed agents for at the SBA?
Well, maybe they need to go after all the coronavirus stimulus checks, the Paycheck Protection Program money that went out the door on a fraudulent basis, and they're not going to hand it over to the U.S. Marshals. They're taking matters into their own hands. I mean, this is crazy. Maybe all those checks that went out to dead people, they're going to go out at $600 a stop and try to recapture. Look, I don't know. And it's these types of things. So after 9/11, when the Department of Homeland Security was created, I guess to build support for the bill, a lot of these paper-pushing, small agencies got arrest and firearm authority. They got the authority to purchase guns, ammunition, and military-style equipment. And so they are.
Let's go to the Smithsonian. Now, I've been there before on a number of occasions, and I have seen probably some Smithsonian security guards there. Are they guarding artwork, or do they extend out beyond the confines of the institution itself? Do we know?
So I think they probably are on premise, but they've instituted a police force. We've seen this now for the first time. So the Smithsonian Institution now has their own police force, and they're ramping up operation. So we noticed this first in 1996 over at Veterans Affairs. Previous to 1996, the VA, they didn't have a police force. Starting in 1996, they instituted a police force, and now that police force has grown to a couple thousand special agents. So now you have, the arts people. Now they have their own police force, and this is the growth that we're talking about that we need to be vigilant on. The Smithsonian Institution now employs 620 armed special agents, up from 0 just in 2008.
Adam, let's go now to a real problem that you point out in your report on opening the books here, looking at these militarizations of U.S. executive agencies. So you mentioned that there are weak controls, and now we have lost things like guns, badges, stamps, and others. So how is it that no one seems to be minding the store here, and what is the danger of the weak controls?
So here's the danger. Everyone remembers on the pier in San Francisco, I'm going to have trouble with her last name, but I think it was Kate Steinle.
Yes.
She was shot by an illegal entrant in this country who had a weapon. Well, it turns out the weapon was a stolen weapon from the car of a DHS officer who had not properly secured his weapon. His weapon was stolen, and this was used in the murder of Kate on that wharf in San Francisco. That's the danger of it. So look, in 2016, when we last did this report, at the end of the Obama administration, immediately it led to hearings in the Republican-controlled House, in the House Oversight and Government Reform. And at the time, Jason Chaffetz was the chairman. And in his opening statement, he went right to the lack of control in the gun lockers at these federal agencies. And he said that AR-15s and Uzis had been stolen and grenade launchers.
Wow. I'm looking at all of this and wondering, I'm so glad that you've brought the report to us, Adam, but I'm just wondering, is the government just too big to even have control over this sort of thing when we've got this many agencies, this many weapons, and all of the ammunition? Is it too big to oversee, and how do we downsize it if that's the correct path?
So our report led to, in the summer of 2017, President Donald Trump issued a reorganization of the federal government, and he adopted what we had called for, that in the non-law enforcement, non-military agencies, these are these paper-pushing agencies like the Environmental Protection Agency, like, Health and Human Service, Social Security, the Smithsonian, their arrest and firearm authority should be transferred to the traditional law enforcement agencies who have the training capability, the history, the tradition, the know-how to do law enforcement, like the U.S. Marshals. That was in his reorganization plan. However, Congress never picked up those provisions.
Finally, on all of this, what about the spending sprees at year's end? We hear about these year after year, but I want you to bring it home for us. Use it or lose it in these agencies.
So the use it or lose it at the end of the year, we've been all over this for the past 4 years. There was $1.5 million spent by these non-military, non-traditional law enforcement agencies on guns and ammo and the equipment in the last month of the fiscal year last year. The VA, for example, and this is a pretty interesting example, they purchased $650,000 worth of ammunition, handguns, and this is an important point, a military police long gun program, and this is an AR-15 style weaponry. So they refreshed their gun locker with new AR-15 style weapons at the VA.
We're talking with Adam Andrzejewski, the founder of Open the Books, and I want to go to one more report here while we have a few minutes left with you. And this is one you had toward the end of last year, improper payments by the U.S. government. Now, I think we're all aware that there's fraud and incompetence in the administration here, but what is the total dollar number of the mistakes that you uncovered in the period of your investigation?
So since 2004, the 20 largest federal agencies admit to $2.3 trillion that they spent on an improper and mistaken basis, which is an absolutely stunning number. Just last year, let's just go to last year, that these 20 largest federal agencies admit that $175 billion went out the door on an improper basis. So let's break that down. That's $15 billion a month that they're admitting to that they shouldn't have paid. Every single hour that the bureaucracy is working, it's $1 million a minute, $500 million a day. This is institutionalized incompetence.
Let's talk about the worst offenders and the worst programs. What did you come up with in this report?
Medicaid, it's Medicare, and it's the earned income tax credit administered by the IRS. So at home, you're supposed to pay your taxes, but the IRS admits that its earned income tax program, 1 out of every $4, a stunning number, over $17 billion, the IRS paid on an improper basis, and that's the number they admit to. When we asked them for a statement on this, they said they just don't have the resources, and this is going to continue into the future. So they admit that there's no end in sight.
You have a great term in the report, and it's ancient Americans, and I love the term, but it's a little tongue-in-cheek. Tell us about the bookkeeping problems and what you call the failure to verify death across these various agencies.
So last year, there was $1 billion that the 20 largest federal agencies admit that they paid on payments to dead people. So it was federal bureaucrats who died that are getting retirement pensions, which drives people crazy, but they continue to get the pension into death. There's, dead farmers that got farm subsidies. There's dead Social Security recipients. So it runs the gamut. So $1 billion went out the door to dead people. So we took a look specifically at the Social Security Administration. Now, we know that there's about 40 people across the entire world that, have longevity. They're aged 112 and over. Well, at Social Security, they admit they've got 6 million active Social Security numbers for people aged 112 and over. Their books are a mess.
There was one bright spot, and I was kind of surprised to see that there was a little turnaround at the Department of Education. Tell us about that.
So Betsy DeVos, 2 years ago when we issued this report on improper payments, we were pretty hard on the department. There was $6 billion in 1 year on student loans and Pell Grants that went out the door on an improper basis. I think at one point there was like 8% of Pell Grants that were overpaid to students, and grants are subsidies, they're giveaways, you don't get that money back. Well, she really took it to heart. She eliminated 85% of her improper payments on a year-over-year basis. This was the best turnaround story out of any of the agencies. She'll probably say that it's still too much money. $1 billion on student loans and Pell Grants went out the door, but it's down from $6 billion. They eliminated 85% of it in 1 year. Kudos to Betsy DeVos.
What are your anticipations for the incoming administration? Has there been any indication that anyone incoming shares the concerns that you've been working on?
There's been no indication to this point. Obviously, the dance card's been full in the national news cycle.
Yeah.
Look, we think, our organization at openthebooks.com, we've, since the pandemic hit in March, we've been on a war footing. We've been giving scrutiny to all these massive omnibus, minibus, bailout bills that are coming down the pike. We added in this country, by our calculation, $4.5 trillion to the national debt in 1 year. And that's nearly the amount the nation had accumulated up through the year 2000. So, look, we feel that the national debt is the number one security threat to the United States of America. And that's the same view that Obama's former Joint Chief of Staff, I believe his name was Mullins, also put forward. He said that the national debt is the number one long-term national security threat to the country, and that's been the opinion of our honorary chairman, former U.S. Senator Dr. Tom Coburn. He passed in March, and Coburn wrote the book, The Debt Bomb. This is a real and present danger to the ongoing concern of the United States of America.
I believe that, and I understand it, but it seems to me, and this will be our final point, Adam, that the American people and perhaps people in elected office somehow believe that we can just continue printing money forever because the big crash hasn't come yet. So what would you say to convince them of the veracity of those claims?
Well, it's never worked ever, not one single time in the history of the world. It's a murder mystery. And if we take it all back to our report on the militarization of the federal agencies, when there's chaos and economic collapse, the federal government moves to preserve themselves, the system, to curtail individual rights, and it always has to be done at the butt of a gun. Look, I'm Polish, and socialism, communism in Poland was enforced at the butt of a gun. This is no secret. Any society that's put forth these things has to have a military apparatus. So we detail this out in our latest report at openthebooks.com, the militarization of these executive federal agencies. And I think it's important reading.
What are your goals for the new year? I know you're stepping it up here. What's the next report, and how often are we going to see reports?
Our goal is to deliver one new oversight report on a tranche of federal data every single month for 2021. So last year we did that once every 2 months. So we're ramping up our oversight efforts. Last year we did 40 investigations, and this year we want to do 140 investigations. And those are 600 to 1,200 word pieces. Those are quicker pieces than our federal oversight deep dives. This deep dive on the militarization of the federal agencies is actually 52 pages.
Adam, tell us how we can support your efforts or get more information on the work you're doing at Open the Books.
Well, we're a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization. So donations are tax deductible to the fullest extent of the law. And you can quite simply just come to openthebooks.com with a credit card or a PayPal account and make a tax-deductible donation.
Adam Andrzejewski, we really appreciate the work that you're doing at Open the Books, and I thank you so much for joining us today on the Schilling Show Unleashed podcast.
Thank you, Rob. Thanks for having me on.
That concludes another edition of the Schilling Show Unleashed podcast. Visit us online at shillingshow.com, where you can directly support this podcast by clicking on the Patreon banner at the top of the page and making a monthly donation. Your support is essential for the continuation of the Schilling Show Unleashed podcast. Until next time.